Weird moment where you're actually live now. So you gotta wait for Facebook to kick on. Morning, everyone. This is Troy Schlicker with Reserve Realty here, getting a chance to talk to Paul O'Brien, CEO of MediaTech Ventures here in Austin, Texas. I got to know Paul through Facebook, where he is very active and a very great resource for startups here in Austin and throughout Texas and stuff. So, Paul, I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today.
A distinct pleasure. Nice to get to know you better and share some thoughts with your audience. And hello, everybody. Nice to meet you all as well, as it were.
Yeah. So, to start off, why don't you kind of give us a little bit of your background in doing a little bit of the research that I do, which is not much at all. I think I noticed that you're originally from Michigan, which I am as well originally, and then made your way kind of cross country and then kind of Texas. But kind of what's your origin story, as it
What's the
were?
story? Yeah,
Yeah,
the origin story. I like that better because I'm a huge superhero and
yeah.
Star Wars geek. My origin story. I'm in my mid 40s. It gives people a sense for what Michigan was like back then.
Yeah.
I grew up when a lot of industries were dying. or moving out, right? As
Mhm.
as you nod your head. Yep, been
Yeah.
there. Uh, so that actually shades quite a bit of my worldview, frankly. That you're right. I ended up in Silicon Valley when things were great, but I've really experienced kind of both sides of what it means to be in economies where they're it's either flush with resources or struggling to put people to work. Um, I bailed on Michigan. I went to Arizona State in particular, which has its own host of stories. And at that time, right in the '90s, uh, you really couldn't learn computer science in the sense that people know it today. You could become a software engineer or do IT, but the internet wasn't pervasive yet, and so the computer geek in me taught myself HTML, and I built websites for some of the colleges. Programs actually back in the mid '90s. Also built a music history website just because I was fascinated with some rock and some of the history of music. Long story short, both of those got the attention of Yahoo, which is how I ended up at in Silicon Valley back in the late '90s. Round about the time that a friend of ours around Texas, Mr. Mark Cuban, had a little company called Broadcast.com acquired by Yahoo. So I was at Yahoo at a really neat time. A lot of commerce stuff, a lot of the early days of how advertising works. We had this early experience called Yahoo Radio and Yahoo Music, thanks to broadcast, and so fun, innovative experience at that point. Long story short, because we may get into it more, I spent
Yeah.
another 8 years or so in the valley. Ended up working with startups quite a bit. Found my way to Texas 11 years ago now, during the last mortgage crisis. So that shades a lot of my point of view as well. Last mortgage crisis, found my way here for a host of reasons. I had kids at that point. I had cancer actually at the same time, and as many people do, just said, "Screw it." There's got to be a better something, right?
Yeah.
And Austin was calling. So I've been here a while. I've been involved in quite a few different things, from co-working companies to the startup scene to some economic development stuff, and most recently have been running this little company that you see now at the bottom here called MediaTech Ventures, and trying to do what I can to help pull as much more business and jobs into Texas and frankly the rest of the country.
Nice. Do a quick shout out for me because I know hopefully a bunch of people. I'm sure you're way more popular on social media and Facebook and stuff than I am. So for all those people who will see Paul, be like, hey, Paul, my name's Troy Schlicker. I'm a broker and a real estate agent here in Austin, Texas, of Reserve Realty, and also the host here of the Austin Spotlight. So mortgage crisis,
Popular. Can I can I
popular.
can I touch on that? Because I,
Yeah,
I I so we work in media, and
yeah,
and and so everybody watching this, right? These are the tricks. These are the stunts. Share this right now if you're watching it.
yeah,
Share it. Tag some
yeah.
people that might be interested in meeting Troy or me. As we do this live, this is how this world works. I had to chuckle a little bit when you said popular because here's the reality.
Yeah,
I know these tricks. There are
yeah,
people that know how to make this stuff work. I
yeah.
think it's more accurate to say I have a lot more followers. I have
Sure,
a lot more
sure.
I have a lot more people I'm connected with on social media, but I've
Yeah.
been doing it for 20 years. And popularity is still kind of this interesting subjective question.
Yes, it is
People
a
actually like
very
what I talk about. I don't know. Some do, I suppose. I try to help as much I can, as you're
yeah.
doing here, Troy. I appreciate this. These kind of experiences, these podcasts, they teach, they connect, they introduce people. So kudos to you. And we'll get to being popular eventually, I hope.
There you go. Yeah, no, first of all, I appreciate it. Popularity is definitely a very subjective thing from that
Right.
standpoint. And so there's a lot of people out there who are well known, whether they're popular or polarizing in some instances, can sometimes be up for debate from that standpoint. But yeah, and like you say, the number of followers you have on a social media account or something like that is definitely a far cry from someone's true popularity, and impact as well too, right? That's probably the bigger thing, is hopefully we're all making an impact with the communities that we have and the people that we get to interact with that way, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said.
So last mortgage crisis, so 06, 7, 8, you have cancer as well, got some kids and stuff. That was obviously an interesting and stressful time there. Were you still, I'm guessing there you weren't currently working at Yahoo anymore? Had you
No.
gone
So,
to,
so yeah. No. I have the enviable story of being rich on paper when I was at Yahoo. And then as my peers all went on to companies like LinkedIn and PayPal and Google and Facebook, I decided to stay at Yahoo longer. And so, so I wrote it back down. I left after I don't know 4 or 5 years. The typical tech startup
mhm,
career, right? You've been somewhere
yeah,
4 years, it's time to move.
I remember.
That's what I did. And then I went to HP. I didn't mention that, but I went to HP for a bit. So I've got some good old Hewlett Packard connections, and love seeing HP Enterprise move this way and move to Texas, and some old compact friends, that kind of thing. Um, my most of my career in the Valley was a result of getting pulled into some startups by some angel investors,
Yeah.
because this was a really neat time back then that I've been trying to help develop here.
Hmm.
Not turning Austin or Texas into Silicon Valley. None of us want that. Let's get that out of the way. However, right, there are some characteristics of what they've learned or the way things work there that
Sure.
are beneficial, and one of those is that the angel community is incredibly well connected and pulls in people to startups. And so I got pulled out of companies because I had some angel investors one day just say, "Hey, why are you doing this for companies? Because we desperately need it in startups too.
Hmm.
Would you be interested in doing one or two at a time?" And that became kind of my thing. I did a couple of startups formally and full time, and those exited. And at that point, the other thing I'm trying to help develop here is the idea of stages in new businesses and startups. At that point, with some of that success proven, I became essentially what's considered a Series A stage uh,
Okay.
go-to guy. If you were at a
Yeah.
Series A stage, I was good at that. I wasn't necessarily good at later stages when you start needing process and operations and that kind of stuff. And early stage, I approached differently, and so I was a Series A guy, and I ended up in another 15 or so startups over the course of my time there, a few at a time, frankly, because a lot of it's replicable, right? You
Hmm.
do the same things for every single startup out there at the stage that they're at. And so my point is, can we develop some of that thought process and some of those networks and some of those resources and those advisors and consultants and so forth here, since ultimately that's a tremendous benefit for the founders and a tremendous benefit for the angel investors to be able to just know who to go to depending on what they're doing at the stage they're at. And got it, let's call Troy. We're at this point. Troy's the guy
Yeah.
that does that kind of thing. Let's just bring him in. And we know it's not going to be full time. We know it's not a job in a traditional sense. These are startups,
Sure.
so you run through a few of them and help them accelerate.
Do you find that in the startup angel world, that a lot of people kind of do have those silos? So right, so someone is more the, um, hey, we're founder need to get things bootstrapped off the ground, versus the A versus the BC round types of guys, or is that kind of unique, or is that just kind of been unique for you to be really that Series A, guy from that standpoint?
Yeah, no, it's I wouldn't use the word silos only because it almost sounds like that's exclusionary.
Sure.
And it's not. It's actually a wonderful thing. There are a lot of people throughout the world that align that way. Angels as well,
Mhm.
in industry, or even stage. Usually angels are associated with pre-seed or seed stage funding, not later stage funding. But you still see angels that are more attuned to or better at software as a service, or even real estate initiatives. A lot of commercial
Mhm.
real estate initiatives that are more real estate tech, or more creative in how they develop a company or develop a business. Those alignments are invaluable, and that's what I like to champion. That in order to accelerate an economy, the best thing we can do is ensure that the investor class and the entrepreneur class, right? The investors putting the money to work, the entrepreneurs putting talent and experience to work, right? Resource, but they're both taking on great risk, great
Mhm.
risk. And so the best thing we can collectively do is mitigate that risk as much as possible. Can we better align people at certain stages and industries and sectors and so forth, so that the investors' money and the founders' time and resources, frankly, aren't being wasted on the wrong kinds of people or the wrong kind of connections, or what have you. Easiest way to think about it: a seed stage startup is not going to do well with somebody who's got 40 years of corporate enterprise
Sure.
industry operations experience. They're just completely different kinds of businesses.
Yeah.
And a lot of founders will make the mistake of, well, that person's really notable and a tremendous amount of experience, and they've been at great companies. Wouldn't it be fantastic to have them on our team? Yes, but they're used to having $1 million budget and a team of 50 people, and and, and
Yeah.
operations and infrastructure in place, and you don't have that, right? So those distinctions are pretty critical to startup ecosystems and economies in general.
How, and percentage probably isn't the best way to put that, but so like what, um, from a startup standpoint, how much of it do you feel it really is kind of making those connections with, the right entrepreneur, the right investors, and those kind of people, key people to bring on, even if it's not the founder or the investor, but right, key management people, key marketing, whoever those people may be, versus there's probably some ideas that have had made the wrong steps, but the idea is just so good that it's eventually going to kind of take off and stuff anyway. So, I mean, do you feel like that getting those people on that team is probably more critical than the idea? Because ideas, as much as we love to think that our ideas and people's ideas are, oh yeah, I have the best idea. There's very few ideas that are truly unique, and in a lot of cases, it's really, I feel, the team and the company and the execution of those ideas that tend to be what brings about the success.
That might be one of the best worded questions I've heard in a long time. What I mean is the right way to ask it. Um, I don't know that you could put a number on it. Uh, you're right about that. But I am certain, or at least I'm personally committed to the fact that it's entirely about connections and team and people. Uh, Couple of anecdotes. MediaTech Ventures obviously works in the media industry, so we see a lot in the media business. Everything from early stage startups to the fact that just today, Cameo, if you're not familiar with Cameo, reached $1 billion valuation. So we see all that kind of stuff. What's
Mhm.
going on in the media industry? Um, I'm aware of right now, just in the last 3 weeks, I'm aware of roughly 8 different startups that are working on music curation, music recommendations based on data, AI, or whatever data
Mhm.
angle they've got. Eight different ones that I'm aware of at the moment, just in 2 weeks. Um, Ideas are a dime a dozen. If you all haven't had that sink in, you're never going to make it work in this world. That there is no startup based on an idea. Startups are based on thousands of ideas, constantly discarded. We generate dozens and dozens of ideas a day, and test them real quick and throw them out. It's the iterations that matter, and that's why that word execution is so key. And concepts like failing fast. Failing fast doesn't mean give up or quit or close the business quickly. It means discard stuff that isn't going to work. Take it and fail it, and if it doesn't work, move on. Move on until you find the things that do work. Because what you're looking for are the distinctions that differentiate you from everybody else, and you can't do that. You can't do that unless those distinctions are known. And if the distinctions are known, then they aren't actually differentiators, right? If everybody knows what makes a company distinct, they'll just do that.
Yeah.
So the fact of the matter in startups is we don't know. We don't know what's different. We don't know what's going to work. All we can do is discard the stuff that we can ideate and iterate and try as quickly as we can. Therefore, it's unequivocally the first case. And I love the question because Troy, you elaborated on a little bit. There's a bit of a misnomer that when we say team, we mean only the founders or only the core initial team. And because of that, on the investor side of things, we see far too many pitch decks that don't highlight advisors or partners or relationships from programs that you've gone through. Your team is much more substantial than you appreciate, or rather, if you don't appreciate that it's much more substantial than you and your couple of founders, you aren't going to make it because you need that marketing experience, even if you don't have it. You need a salesperson, even if you don't have it. You need a biz dev person, even if you can't afford one. You have to figure out how to fill all the gaps in the organization because you need to move quickly and efficiently and iterate through these ideas. The other decent example that comes to mind is that we're working with the country of Israel on startup programs, and the media innovation in the country of Israel is mind blowing. Like AR literally on my table right now as we're talking to each other. I mean, just mind blowing kind of stuff that they're pulling together. A lot of sports tech, esports too. Nobody's aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful ideas, funded ideas, developed products, right? Really, really brilliant stuff. Brilliant by Silicon Valley standard stuff, but nobody's aware of it. Why? Because the teams aren't substantial enough such that they're connecting with those marketing people and those promotions people and sales people, that they know how to get the word out on social media, that they know how to get press, that they're really well connected in the US so they can accelerate these things. It is unequivocally about connecting with more people, putting in place the right connections as quickly as you can, and being able to execute and test those ideas as fast as you can to find what works.
Yeah, no, that's it's always interesting to see those different viewpoints and to see, like say, just the amount of things that, speaking about Israel, stuff that's out there that you're just not aware of, but it's like, oh my gosh, that would seems like it would catch fire just on its own, but it doesn't necessarily from that standpoint.
Yeah, the old Field of Dreams analogy, if you build it, they will come, is completely bullshit. Forgive my French. Is completely bullshit when it comes to startups. Product and app and MVP never comes first. Rather, it does for a great many things, and those are what we call zombie startups, or those are the things that fail because you built something and hopefully people just show up and buy it. It doesn't work that way any more than, Troy, right? Any more than it works in real estate.
Yeah.
If you think about it, right? I mean, yes, when a house goes up or a skyscraper downtown goes up, it does get filled in time. Yes, it does get acquired in time, but there's so many other factors about, is it in the right part of town? And is that part of town appealing? And are we socializing that part of town? Are we attracting attention to that region? If we're not, then you end up with not a criticism, but you end up with Austin 15 years ago when you didn't have all of this inbound demand, right? You didn't have all of these people saying, I want to buy something. I want to use your thing. And I'd like to do it there or in that way, because that's the one I hear about. And that's what's sexy. And that's what I'm looking for. Valuations go up. Your ability to make money goes up. Your pipeline goes up. It's all a result of awareness, creating demand, creating enthusiasm, creating excitement for things, and then meeting that demand, right? Then developing what's needed there because you've created an opportunity to develop something there.
Yeah, no, I said a lot about agents themselves, right? Like agents think, oh, real estate sounds fun. There's money that can be made as being an agent, and so you get a lot of people who go get their license, and it's not, you walk down the aisle at HEB, and you probably know, or probably past 10 people in the HEB who have a real estate license. But most people, when they first get it, think, oh, well, I have a real estate license, so now I get to go buy and sell homes, and you don't realize that, well, your family and friends probably don't need a home right now, and they're not going to buy a home just because you got a license. So you have to actually go out again and market yourself and actually go find that business and stuff. And while there is plenty of business out there, same way in the tech world, it's not a zero sum game. that doesn't mean that it's just going to throw itself at you without you putting in the effort.
It's entirely that. When I moved here, I went to the homeowners association in our neighborhood. I'm in West Austin. Went to the homeowners association in our neighborhood, and just wanted to make a difference and have an impact. And so this is 11 years ago, 12 years ago now. Keep in mind. And I said to them, look, your website is awful, frankly, right?
Yeah.
And and I could build you one in a day. And I just moved here, and I'm passionate about the community. I'd love to get to know people. Can I make you a new website and add some network and community kind of features to it? And I got the cold shoulder, and I've told the story a few times, so I don't mind telling the story. I got the cold shoulder because at that point the HOA was still run by the developer, which your real estate community I'm sure is familiar with. I wasn't familiar with that.
Sure.
Happening.
Yep.
The developer still ran things, so understandably, they didn't want me getting some control of what gets communicated now.
Yeah.
My point is, I've had this subtle experience with being in the real estate ecosystem, because the one thing you never do to an entrepreneur like me is tell them no, because we'll just go do it anyway. And so that's what I did. I went and launched.
You asked for forgiveness instead of for permission.
Oh yeah, right. Or and or when they say no, you're just like, okay, thank you very much. I'll go find somebody else who wants to do it. Because I wasn't really asking, I was offering.
Yes.
So I went and built it. I built this thing called the Steiner Ranch Post. I'm in Steiner Ranch Post. I used to have a website. I don't have a website anymore because it's not worth it. But built a huge Facebook community. And out of that, a number of realtors in this part of the world reached out and asked if they could leverage it, if they could promote themselves. I had a couple offer to buy it at one point. Point though is not to observe how the real estate industry has tried to engage with those kind of things. The point is that it was 11 years ago, 12 years ago, where a lot of the real estate ecosystem woke up and started recognizing your point, Troy, that since then there are two groups in this part of the world that have pretty big Facebook properties all about the neighborhood. And so they're known because of that. They don't sell. They don't, they celebrate the neighborhood. They learned by, example. They learned by what I stood up here. There's another guy in the neighborhood that is now doing viral videos, hilarious viral videos about all the political stuff that's going on in this part of the world. That's his approach. And I want to share those two things because, Troy, you're doing the same thing here, right? With this Austin spotlight, this opportunity to, here's my point, ties back to what I do, leverage media technology. That was a social media example, a viral video example, and here we're doing a podcast and live stream. The world is getting to know you better, getting to know those people better, getting to know me better as a result of these things we're doing. If you're in any business, real estate or restaurant, I hate how restaurants don't know how to do this yet. If you're a restaurant, you're not doing this kind of stuff yet, you're going to struggle. This stuff isn't very hard to do. It's not very hard to learn how to use. You've got to engage your community. You've got to leverage these forms of media and these technologies because it's what your consumer wants to engage with. It's what your audience really wants to engage with, so that when they're ready to buy something, you're the person they call.
You're top of mind at that point in time. Yeah, no, exactly like I say, and we're fortunate. There's a lot of people who get frustrated because suddenly now I got to be on Facebook or now I got to be on Instagram and stuff. But it's also a chance to actually send your message directly to your audience, right? Versus, now, back in the day, you'd have to pay to be in a newspaper, pay to be on TV or, all those kind of things. And so not that there aren't paid things as well too, but it's like I say, it's just an opportunity to actually connect on a human level with people. And as much as some people, dislike social media because of that detachment, and there's definitely aspects of that too, you also get the opportunity to connect with people that you never would connect with otherwise, and in greater ways, right? Like but through this whole pandemic, the fact that that had this happened 10 years ago, before we had all these visual, before we could do voice calls and all those kind of things, it would have been even harder to not be able to see your parents or do video chats with them and stuff like that. And so there's just a lot of opportunity of reaching out to people and connecting with them through all these mediums.
If y'all have read, or if you haven't read Simon Sinek's "Start with Why," that's a fantastic book philosophically, because you made a good point, Troy. Though that it can seem overwhelming that we need to be on all of these different social media platforms. Uh, because the fact is you don't,
Mhm.
and the fact is you shouldn't be. That I love Sinek's book, and starting with this concept of why, or your purpose, or your mission, because at the end of the day, if you're going to run a business, the business has to be an extension of you. You can't just make other things work for you because you feel like they should. That's not what works. That's not how it works. I for example write a lot. I write a crazy amount. You've seen it on social media and Facebook if you're there with me, but I also write a tremendous amount of articles and blog posts. I've had people constantly tell me I should create videos. Video producers, YouTube kind of people. Paul, you should
Mhm.
be on video. That's not my thing. I
Yeah.
don't I don't do that. I don't just naturally do that. And so you know what you do as a business person, you don't worry about it. Don't do what you're not naturally attuned to. Don't do Instagram if that's not your personality
Yeah.
style to take those kind of photos that people are going to get excited about because you can't fake it.
No.
You
Yeah,
find your
you lean into your strengths because you get exposed very quickly if you're trying to fake it. I can attest to your writing skills because I know we've had a few times where we've chatted back and forth on things on Facebook, and it usually takes me about 10 minutes to write a 3-second response. And I'm like, oh, I'll come back to this later, and immediately 30
I already
seconds
go.
later, I got a post. Oh, Paul already responded, and I'm like, this is a whole novel. I don't know what's happening right now. So, but yeah, right. Say if you have to lean into your strengths because you get exposed very quickly if you're trying to be someone you're not. And
And
it's exhausting. Even if you could keep it with the facade, it's exhausting. Like, why would you even? Yeah.
it's exhausting. It ties back to our previous bit of a discussion about those silos, though, too. That as a business professional, as the city of Austin, if anybody works with the city of Austin, as a startup founder, there are far more channels that are untapped, that are not well developed, where there's opportunity, than would be valuable for you all than trying to break into and own the very crowded spaces that seem top of mind. One that comes to mind, for example, is I'm pretty active on a platform called Quora, Quora,
Mm-hmm.
question and answer platform. I run a space for Austin. A space is a group of certain
Yep.
questions and answers. A space for Austin. Um, the number of times we get asked about Austin in that space is tremendous. Dozen a day. There really isn't anybody in that space with me. There are a couple
Yeah.
of other Quarrens in that space. But my point is, right, if you work for the city, or you work in economic development, or you work in real estate, or you work for in the hospitality business, or you work in the entertainment business, there are massive channels where people are saying, what should I do in Austin? Where should I go
Mm-hmm.
in Austin? Right? It's easy to think, oh, everybody's on Twitter and everybody's on Facebook. I got to figure out how to do Facebook. No,
Yeah.
that's not correct. Or you got to Instagram. That's not correct. There are channels out there where nobody's answering, nobody's talking about anything, but people are asking. Find what you're good at, find your passion, find your ability, and then uncover those channels that are meaningful to that. You could find audiences hanging out there just waiting for someone to help, just
Yeah.
waiting for someone to comment.
And like I say, in a lot of cases, it's easier to be, even if it's a smaller group, it's easier to be recognized and get your message across in those areas than it is on a Facebook or an Instagram where there's so many people from that standpoint to where standing out's
Yeah,
challenging.
especially as a small business,
Yeah.
or more so a new business or startup,
Hmm.
because there's nothing more valuable than having 10 wonderful evangelists at that stage, right? People who really know you, really like you. You get those evangelists and you start to grow from there, rather than getting into the Austin Startups Facebook group, for example, where I'm pretty active. There are 100 posts a day. I post those long ass articles that that Troy referred to. I post maybe as many as two a week. I'm sorry, two a day. Uh, you know, can you keep up with that? If you can't keep up with that, you're just going to get lost in the noise, right?
Yep.
It almost touches on that point about popularity that I made at the beginning. That that it's not really popularity. It's that you have to know how these things work. Once you know how they work, you can engage them effectively and meaningfully, and you can prioritize your time and resources, and you can find the things that are right for you, rather than banging your head up against the wall trying to figure out why Reddit to mention another one. Why
Sure.
Reddit doesn't work for you? Well, maybe
No.
it's just not. Maybe it's too competitive. Maybe it's not your thing. Right? There are a lot of reasons it doesn't work. You can't just hire a consultant and suddenly be an Instagram star. That's not how this. That's not how
No.
the internet works.
Unfortunately not. Another kind of thing where I feel like where our two worlds are very intertwined right now is in the real estate space. Like right, so with technology these days, like Austin obviously is in a super growth mode from real estate valuations. So people looking for homes, it's a relatively simple supply and demand thing, but it's because the demand has skyrocketed due to a lot of people realizing that they can work remotely or being required to work remotely. And so I think that there's just a lot of people who have relocated from the Silicon Valleys, LAs, the New Yorks, because hey, why would I spend quarantine in a 400 square foot studio apartment in New York City when I could spend it in a 1,000 square foot apartment that I can actually, two bedrooms and have space and go to and stuff. And so, do you feel? Part of me feels that the the growth that happened, and this has happened also in e-commerce and a lot of different things, that it basically just accelerated that growth that Austin was going to have naturally anyway. That was probably was going to take 3 to 5 years for us to get happened in 12 to 18 months. Or do you feel like as things get a little bit more back to normal, that we'll see a bigger shift of people kind of moving back to those areas or other areas from that matter? Because there's obviously a lot of people who have probably left Austin to go to, I know friends in Montana or other parts of the country where it's like, hey, we can live somewhere even cheaper and more cost effective because we can do all of our stuff remotely now. What are your kind of thoughts on how that plays out in the next couple of years?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite questions because aside from startup stuff in the media business, I'm a amateur professional economic development person, um, and I just love that question. Miami is booming now. For example, if y'all didn't know, Austin. What's the next Austin? Maybe Miami. They're being very very aggressive about it, heavily promoting the startup ecosystem and that kind of thing. And it's got all those characteristics, Troy, that you're referring to. Um, e- Economic development is this big word that's actually much simpler than it seems. You create jobs. We learned that. Troy and I learned that in Michigan. It all starts and ends with jobs. Are there jobs being created or not? Or is the potential for jobs? Is there potential for jobs? If the answer is no, there's nothing else that you can do. It has to start with jobs, and that's what was the catalyst for Austin. That when folks like Josh Baer and myself and tech stars move up to move up from San Antonio to Austin, when the startup stuff started maturing and pushing a lot harder, 5, 6, 7 years ago, you have to appreciate that what happened first was what Troy and I talked about. What happened first was about 10 years ago, about 11 years ago, was the mortgage crisis, resulting in a lot of people leaving to places like Austin the first time. People moving here now is not the first time.
Yeah.
It's actually the third or fourth time, but
Yeah.
it happened. It happened to a great extent 10 years ago, and it was the 10 years ago when that first wave of a lot of job creators came. Uh,
Mm.
and so those companies moved here, and we didn't have the big real estate boom because it wasn't so substantial yet, and because the mortgage crisis was depressing everything, right? It was keeping it down. So when I moved here, I got here affordably and started going to work trying to figure out how to create jobs, as did many other people. Uh, because of that, right? When jobs exist, here's the second key to economic development. When jobs exist, what you create is stability. You create a sense of stability, and that enables the risk-taking class to take risk. Entrepreneurs don't start jobs just because they want to. Don't start companies just because they want to. They start jobs because they feel comfortable that they can. And investors don't just throw money at startups because there's a cool startup. They really don't. They throw money at startups because there's an opportunity there. It needs to seem like there's an opportunity. And believe it or not, everybody, the evidence of opportunity is actually that you eliminate the downside risk first, not that you create the upside. You eliminate the downside risk. How had Austin eliminated the downside risk? Well, if our startup fails, I can go back to work because we had created jobs. That's what enabled Austin to become a vibrant ecosystem. That's what the catalyst in the start of Silicon Valley was. investment to create jobs, big companies. And because big companies existed, those companies could start to take risks, and those people could start to take risks. That's what has happened in Austin in the last 10 years. Now, here's the rub. The second key to economic development is actually mobility. It's actually mobility, because what happens is now something like what has happened here, and Phoenix is a good example of this. When you do not have mobility, you create pockets, you create bubbles within the ecosystem because people can't get around town. So downtown Austin, for example, right now is a bubble because it's incredibly expensive and it's difficult to get into and get out of. And so when things turn south a little bit, as they will, they always do, right? As they will, what's going to happen? The bubble collapses more. People vacate where it's too expensive. They'll move to the outskirts, or they'll move somewhere else because nobody wants to sit in traffic for an hour. Phoenix, this is what happened to Phoenix. Phoenix used to have a very vibrant downtown Phoenix. In a bust, I think it was 30 years ago, downtown dried out and everybody just spread. This is anecdotally, it's what's happened to Dallas. It's what happened to Houston. It's what happened to San Antonio. One can hope that Austin will learn from those mistakes and invest in mobility so that someone can buy a home in East Austin and they can stay there for 20 years and they can work on any side of town because it's easier to get there. If we don't do that, then what you're talking about, Troy, is what's going to happen. If we don't do that, when things get tough again, people will go to the next place, right? Austin is not the first next place. Denver was a next place before Austin, as far as the startup scene was concerned. Why didn't Denver boom? Because they didn't invest in all of those characteristics properly. We invested in job creation. We invested in the startup ecosystem. Great. But now we've got an ecosystem in which our investor class is way on the west side of Austin, and a lot of the startups are popping up way on the east side of Austin. When things get tough, they're not going to drive an hour across town to stay connected, right? And so will we be challenged as a region and as an ecosystem to ensure that people benefit from staying here when things are tough? Yeah, we're going to be challenged a bit because I'm going to need to go find a job, 40 minutes away. That's something that we need to preserve and plan for. Right? The ideas of affordability, for example, the ideas of zoning, they all actually stem from whether or not we have a mobile ecosystem. Do we have a mobile economy? If we don't, you can't force affordability. Y'all in real estate know that, right? Property in downtown Austin is going to be much more expensive because it's appealing, because it's on the water, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The only way to make it more affordable is to enable mobility, enable people to get in and out easily so that they can afford to maybe live somewhere else but work there. If you don't have mobility, you actually create these zones that get more and more expensive. So we're going to see it. We're going to see it shift somewhere else to an extent. And actually, that's a good thing. Don't misunderstand my criticism. We're going to see certain sectors in particular, industries, realize, maybe Austin wasn't the best place for that. Maybe we should be in Miami or Nashville or Chicago instead, given what we do. But at the same time, because Austin is well-developed, the job market, well-developed, the startup ecosystem, we're not going to see it collapse. We're not going to see it collapse at all, ever, like Phoenix struggled with. Because while some industries will move to a better place when things get tough, certain industries will become much more dominant. And in time, in a matter of years, frankly, Austin will be the definitive place in the world for those industries.
I would say I also feel, again, back to our Michigan background, right, of the car companies, right, which were predominant. You couldn't do work from home while you're on the assembly line in the car company and stuff there. With tech, and Austin obviously being such a heavy tech focus, it seems like a lot, well, there's definitely still benefits to working together in offices, having in-person meetings and those kind of things. The technology we have today, which allows us to do stuff like we're doing now, but also that ability to kind of collaborate on a project while being somebody in East Austin, somebody in West Austin, somebody in LA. How do you feel like that may have some impact on minimizing some of those bubbles and stuff, because it's not a matter of, when again back for Austin's really last big decline was the tech bubble of like 01, and Dell was really kind of the one major player. And so when when Dell stock went down and that went down, that depressed home prices quite a bit, and there was a lot of angst and stuff there. But now, one, we have the diversity of so many different companies and stuff now that, and the internet's, everyone knows it's not a fad anymore. It's not just a one-time thing, but also the fact that we have the technologies to do so much more remote working and collaboration and those kind of things that, hey, I don't necessarily have to make that trip from West Austin to East Austin 5 days a week. I'm only having to go in there 2 days a week now, or 1 day a week. Do you think how much of an impact do you think those kind of things will or do have?
We're starting to see, and we're starting to talk about, it's actually going to have less of an impact than people think or hope.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, we're still social people and we want to connect.
Mhm.
I'm an introvert, believe it or not, because I'm on Facebook all the time and I can talk on a microphone. I'm very introverted. I can't stand sitting in my house for 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, and working from here. I need to get back out to some places, right?
Mhm.
And I'm somewhat of an extreme. I kind of enjoyed quarantine.
Yeah.
Far more people can't do that. Don't want to do that. It it misses the more fundamental point, that it's the industry and whether or not the jobs exist there, right? That sure, I could quit my job today and go work at another job tomorrow on the east side of Austin. But if it's not a job in my sector, not just tech, what the heck does tech
Sure.
mean?
Sure.
If it's not in my specialization, my sector, my industry, the auto industry is a great example. If it's not my thing, then what am I going to do? I'm going to go be a banker. I'm going to go suddenly be, the head of marketing for a CPG company. I can't do that, right? I can only be where I can only thrive where there are in fact a host of jobs where I live. So Houston is a great talking point for us in economic development. Why? Because we like to make the point that there's tremendous value in the fact that Shell and BP Oil have offices right across the street from each other. And most people think, well, aren't they competitors? That doesn't make any sense, right? Why would they, why couldn't people be remote? No, the fact is when Shell has a tough earnings quarter and needs to lay off 100 people, 100 people in Houston get to go right across the street and work for BP. That's how economies work. That's what's valuable. And so when we look at Austin, the question is, what do we do well here? What are the industries that we do well, so that when times are tough, you don't have to go get a remote job in Seattle. You can just go across the street and keep doing what you do successfully for somebody else, rather than having too much diversity. Too much diversity is actually a bad thing. Now, the challenge is, and why I love the auto example, is Detroit misunderstood the industry that they were in. Autos alone is not an industry. It's a part of the transportation industry. And Detroit and the Midwest could have and should have taken grasp of the fact that with Chicago right there, with rail running through there, which is why most of Michigan's economy exists, and with the auto industry transitioning 20, 30 years ago, Michigan could have and should have been the hub of our innovation industry for the transportation business. But they missed that boat because they wanted to own autos. And Japan punched them in the teeth about autos. And they didn't realize that, if you work in transportation, if you work for GM in Austin, right? GM is in Austin. There are a lot of people that work for GM. If you work for GM in Austin, you could pretty easily go work for Metro Rail. You could pretty easily get a job with one of the airlines, right? Because it's the transportation business where there are a lot of parallels. And that's a great example, I think, of one of those industries that Texas, Austin and Texas, can now celebrate and should own. Michigan, Dallas, Detroit missed the mark. But what do we have in Texas? We've got rail going up. We've got hyperloops going up. We've got two major airlines. We've got auto industries, auto companies putting their headquarters or their innovation centers here. We've got Elon Musk, love him or hate him, and Tesla in this part of the world. The transportation business is a perfect example of what is Texas, what should Texas own, and if you want to work and live and thrive in the transportation business, you got to call Texas part of the place that you call home. Because where else would you do that? Where else would that be? That's the key, Troy, to economic development, job growth, and creating value in real estate is finding those synergies, right? Because if you want to work in the auto business, where else would you go? Maybe back to Detroit, right? They're figuring some things
Sure.
out.
Yep.
But would you work remote from Denver?
Yeah.
No, right? Because you want to work remote. I mean, sure, some people will, right? Some people do want to work remote. That's nice. But when you lose that job, or you want to become a transportation industry startup entrepreneur, you're going to be stuck in Denver without the right connections and without the right people. No. So what do we do well here, right? We do media exceptionally well. We do real
Mhm.
estate tech really well. We do transportation really well. There's a lot of discussion about the idea that we do political tech really well for a host of reasons I'm sure we can figure out. That we do ed tech really well for reasons that should be obvious, right? That's how you create an economy that thrives. That's why a lot of us are now excited about this part of the world, because we're starting to realize that. We're starting to figure out what Austin is best at and say, you know what, let's double down on that. Let's get everybody to invest in that together, and then pull those people here, pull those companies here, pull those people who want to live here and work here, to move and buy homes here, because they're going to stay. They're going to create value. They're not just moving here to pop up a house and flip something and work remote somewhere else. They're actually going to invest in that industry, our industry, in this part of the world.
Cool. If you were so the czar, we'll say the czar of Austin economic development, what would be the one main thing you would want to get done um, to help
Whew.
development?
Honestly, that too, I think ties a little bit back to where we started the conversation, which might make it a somewhat appropriate anecdote to wrap the conversation with. The one thing that I've always found about Texas and Austin that struggles is communication, marketing, frankly, and communication. And what I mean by struggle is, if you think about it, when before we moved here years ago, or think about it through this lens. How many people in the world get their news about Austin from Austin? Or do they instead get it from what's in the New York Times and TechCrunch? That Austin's really hot right now.
Mhm.
And yet, is anybody paying attention to our voices? Or are they paying attention to other voices? The New York Times is a thing. The city of New York is a major thing, read worldwide. Even the Dallas Morning News is somewhat of a national newspaper brand.
Yeah.
Um, Austin in general, and what do we do about economic development? What do we do about the city? Our voice is not heard loud enough, and it's critically important, because our voice is the culture, right? Our voice is the here's why Austin, not just there's a new company here with a lot of jobs, but why Austin? Why Austin music? What is the keep it weird thing? Right? Is that like Portland? No, 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 no,
Yeah.
no. It's not like Portland. We got our own thing, right? Nobody can tell those stories except for us, right? Nobody can talk about my point about this being a wonderful world and ecosystem for media except for us collectively, because New York Times isn't going to dig that deep. They're not going
Yeah.
to look at all the video game stuff and the podcasting stuff. They're not going to learn. They're not going to uncover the fact that the individual Adam Curry, considered the godfather of podcasting, actually lives in Austin. He was an MTV VJ back when we were kids.
Yeah.
Lives in Austin. Does anybody know that? No. Why? It's my point. We're not telling those stories well enough. We don't. We need to, on behalf of the city and the chambers, we need to do a better job of marketing, learning about the market on behalf of our own ecosystem and our economy, and then telling more stories and celebrating those stories and doing it well, reaching audiences well, building media brands, building podcasts that reach tens of thousands, because the world wants to pay attention to Austin. We need to start telling the stories better ourselves rather than letting somebody else tell the story for us.
Yeah.
Do that, do that, and this is going to become one of the metropolitan cities of the entire world. If not the fact that it already is, this is going to become one of the epicenters of the world in the coming 5 or 10 years, if we can maintain and promote and celebrate our own culture and economy on our own behalf a lot better than we do today. I think we're getting there.
Awesome. Yeah. No, I think we have a lot of steps there, or a lot of opportunity, but I think a lot of people with the interest in making those kind of things happen. So
Here,
we
here.
have not missed the boat yet, like Detroit. So hopefully we can take advantage.
No, I don't think we're going to miss the boat. I think we're in an interesting time and set of circumstances in which, like I said, what we're going to do, we're going to find out more. You've heard of the idea of a T-shaped,
Sure.
a T-shaped individual.
Yeah.
There's another city concept I think that can be overlooked. What is Austin's T-shape, right? We're pretty broadly decent at this kind of stuff, but what are the
Mhm.
what are the things that we actually do really well?
Sure.
If we can uncover those T-shaped concepts about Austin and the economy here, we're going to crush it. We're never going to slip. Uh, Detroit wasn't a T-shape. Detroit was an I, right? Or the auto
Yes.
industry. And before that, right, it was music. Before that, or shipping, right? And it was always fixated on its one thing, such that when the one thing stumbled a little bit, it collapses. We've got to find our T. There's a podcast show. Somebody start that podcast with me. Tea Time with Austin.
Nice. I like it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode, and I really appreciate Paul for coming on. Quick shout out for a couple of ways to kind of get in touch with him. This is your main company, MediaTech Ventures. You want to say a little bit about that company?
Yeah, very, very quickly. Actually, would love to have everyone connect with us because we've built a social network on our site. So our website is effectively now sort of like LinkedIn. We got a long way to go to actually build that, but we built this experience so that anybody with media skills, if you're a podcaster, if you take photos, if you are a startup professional in the music industry, just come sign up. Why? Because we're promoting the hell out of you. And we can't do that if you're not there. And we're trying to connect people. We run startup incubators throughout the world. And so we work with a lot of early stage startups. We're always looking for more teachers who could talk to startups and teach startups, as well as investors who want to invest in early stage things. We see a few hundred a year. And part of my enthusiasm for joining Troy on the show is that we're actually looking at real estate a little bit too. Not in the residential context, perhaps obviously, but we're looking at how these economic development zones or these regional identities that we're talking about often, in fact, always have commercial real estate considerations as well, right? Where's the physical infrastructure for our media business, for our media industry? So we're looking at a lot of real estate as well. So folks are interested in that slice of it, not just here, but in other cities, either as an investor or with some properties or interests in holdings, those kind of things. We've got a lot of projects in place that are going to help catalyze and accelerate that side of things as well. So really just come join us. That's the easiest way to get involved.
Awesome. A couple other ways I know you can get a hold of Paul here is his SEO Brian site. And then like you mentioned, how I kind of got a hold of him on his Facebook group, Texas Startups. It's a really cool group with a lot of interesting perspectives and people and things. And Paul is very active there, and you can get great insights from him there as well. Appreciate you coming on, taking the time.
Troy, it's been a pleasure. Everybody, thank you very much. Share, like, throw a comment on there, tag us, because that way we can.
Yeah, we'll comment. If you tag us, we'll comment and we'll like. So
that's exactly right. Real pleasure.
Appreciate it, everyone. Thanks. Have a great day.